everyone, my name is Kat Savage and I'm a professional artist, clinical hypnotherapist and well-being expert working with those in the creative arts sector. In my line of work, I get to meet some amazing, colourful people, from actors to artists, people who live their lives by their own rules, fueled by passion and determination to bring their unique talents into the world. I wanted to discover what it took for people to leave the usual 9 to 5 and hop on a dream, to capture their bravest moments and share these meaningful conversations with you, so that together we can explore the ideas, emotions and moments that could potentially change our lives too. The Brave Moment podcast begins now, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, probably the bravest moment not only for my guests, but for the whole world. So let's keep talking, have some fun, and enjoy the show. This week on the show, we speak to multi-award-winning executive producer and assistant editor for BBC News and BBC Three's Kim Rowell. Among her list of many accolades, Kim has been recognised as the Digital Woman of the Year, the Financial Times Kindness and Leadership Leading Light, Female Frontiers Championing Change Honouree, and winner of the Woman of the Future Awards, where she now hosts a podcast of the same name. Author, Tedx Speaker, mother, and a black belt kickboxer to boot, it hasn't always been easy for Kim. And after being made redundant 3 times in her life, she explains how your circumstances don't have to define you, your career, or your personal and emotional success. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to the inspirational Kim Rowell. Kimberly Rowell, welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you on this lovely day?
I'm really good. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, no, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. And I have to start, first of all, by just giving you a massive clap for all of your awards through lockdown, but all the hard work that you've been doing. You've been so busy. How do you feel now that we're sort of coming to the end of it all?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I don't think anyone thought when it was announced last March that we'd be in this for over a year. I don't think that was ever in anyone's minds at all. But I think what we've kind of collectively been able to achieve, and I know that the team that I work with in particular, but just generally as a community and as a society, it's quite remarkable, really, isn't it? And I kind of want to applaud everyone out there for all of the kind of efforts and everything that we've all been through, because it has been a phenomenal struggle as well. But, we've all, most of us, thankfully, touch wood, have kind of made it through. So well done to everyone else listening, I guess.
I absolutely agree. And in some respects, it's been kind of nice to have a little bit of time out just to reassess and reevaluate our lives and sort of crack on in a different way and try and find new ways to survive everything. So I think that's kind of brought us all together, hasn't it?
Yeah, completely. And I don't think one of my big things in life is that we never take the opportunity to stop and take stock of everything we have, everything we want, everything we've achieved. We never do that. And I think it's almost like a big maternity leave for the country, isn't it? So we're all giving birth right now. So I think it's been interesting.
Some of us quite literally. The lockdown is real. Now, of course, you are a member of the BBC, a very, very high executive editor of the BBC. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I do consider you to be one of the guardians of the stories that our nation is exposed to. What is it that you look for in a story, and how do you recognise when it's worth telling?
Me personally, and I'm not saying this is what everybody does, I think it's all about the story and the access and the people that you're kind of investing in, and why are you telling this story in the first place? And like, just to promote my own stuff, but I did a TEDx talk not so long ago, like last year in the middle of the pandemic, and I kind of highlighted three points that I think are phenomenally important when it comes to any kind of news story. So consider the style and tone, like the way you're telling something. How are you doing it? Where are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Where have you gone in the country? Who are you reflecting? Who are you getting to with this story? The storytelling techniques and the element of escapism. So everyone wants a little bit of light relief. Everyone wants to either just escape the realities. It's kind of the reason we all watch Married at First Sight Australia, that kind of stuff. You know, it's just what are we getting out of this? How are we kind of opening people's eyes? And then one of the most important points, and this is the final one, put your audience, people and characters first. They are the reason that we're telling these stories. And I think like rolling news is a bit different because obviously it's just reflective of, you know, like Duke of Edinburgh being in hospital, or, you know, latest vaccine news or the budget, that kind of thing. But, you know, putting people at the heart of the stories, you are always going to empathize, and you are always going to, you know, tug on people's feelings and heartstrings. And I think that's one of the most important things that you can do when it comes to storytelling.
I absolutely and utterly agree. And funnily enough, I was watching, just doing a little bit of research on you and sizzling down to some good TV. And I started to watch your False Hope documentary, which I know that you produced. And it utterly changed my perspective on cancer treatment, because I've always been of the sort of mindset that if you can go alternative, you know, that's best, etc., etc. But after watching that documentary, I was absolutely floored and started to question my own beliefs. And I think that's so important. And I wonder, like, when you're creating these stories, are you in the back of your mind thinking, right, we've got to sort of remain impartial when we're telling them, or are you kind of looking for that way to persuade the nation into maybe a different way of seeing things?
That's a really good question, because I think that story in particular was that the guy, Kim Rowell, she was really young. He was just into his 20s, I think. And he'd already had cancer once, and he tried chemo, and his cancer had come back. And through kind of family connections, he wanted to try these alternative therapies, which included thermographic imaging and things like that. And we all looking at the story from, like, you think, oh, everyone's got general common sense. Everyone can see what you should do when you have cancer. But there is no one size fits all. And you have to be reflective and sensitive to all these different kind of nuances that there are. And that's the reason that we make these stories. And that one was particularly hard because we actually went undercover, did some secret filming at the thermographic clinic in Liverpool where he was from. And we kind of called them out, and it was there. And before the actual doc went out, they'd obviously not seen the secret filming. And I got threats from their lawyers. And there was a clinic in Mexico who was threatening to take out tabloid adverts against me.
Oh my goodness!
It was the first time in my career I'd had like a bit of a sleepless night before something came out. But then when it did, the evidence was so stacked against them, we never heard from them again. So, it's the strength of the story, and it's just got to be robust and bulletproof. If you're going to uncover something and investigate it, you just need to do it thoroughly and accurately and lay it out there for people to make their own assumptions from and take their own views from. That's what we've got to do with our journalism.
I can't imagine that night before. Oh my goodness, Kim. Oh, you must have been shaking in your boots.
Yeah, I think so. I just thought, this is me. I don't want to put my family at risk. I don't want us to get like poo shoved through the door or whatever. But in all honesty, no, in my luck, it would have been like the Daily Star or something if they did take out an advert. But I think that was it. We just knew what we'd done. And obviously we'd spoken a lot with our own compliance and legal teams. And we just had literally gone through the script word for word. And we knew we were fine. And that was reassuring. And knowing that the BBC is behind you in these circumstances. And it was so powerful. It saw the Cancer Act changed in Parliament. So, that was the repercussion. We actually got alternative therapies, reviewed as part of the Cancer Act. So that's what we achieved. And you think, well, that actually makes it more tangible and almost makes it worthwhile, I would say.
I totally agree. Although I don't envy you in that situation. So I'll leave it to the professionals, I think. Talking of positive stories, though, I know that you had the great privilege of meeting our national treasure, Captain Sir Tom Moore. And I know that he's recently passed away, bless him. And that story in itself, it was just so simple, and yet everyone I know is so deeply touched by it. Why do you think that was? And why do you think his story became an important thing to us at this time?
He was just a symbol of everything that we needed, wasn't he? Just even the story of how he just decided to start walking up and down his garden and his daughter said, I'll give you an extra couple of quid if you keep going until your 100th birthday. And she did work in like press and PR and put out a little press release locally. And then as soon as that global media, I think there was only a handful of countries in the world that didn't take up the story or didn't have people donate to the cause, which is incredible. But as to what he symbolises, it's just hope, isn't it? And just in the midst, it was as bleak as it possibly could have been in the pandemic. And he'd been in the army and he'd found love second time round when he was a little bit older. And it was just, he had a little twinkle in his eye and he was such a nice guy. And I don't know, but you can be critical and you can kind of, be, I don't know, everyone, even like within the BBC, people did get a little bit fed up of the story because it was such an ongoing thing. But having met him and met his family, and I spoke to his daughter as part of a podcast I do, and she even, like, people had gone up to her in the street and said, do you realise what you've done? She was getting so much stick for, trying to help him. And obviously, because he was kind of profoundly deaf, she was his ears, and people would criticise her for wearing her company T-shirt when she was doing that. And she's like, well, I'm working now. I've literally run across from my office. This is what I'm wearing so that I can hear for him. They don't criticise. I'm trying to help. But,
bless her.
But it was what we all needed, I think, in that moment when we were all we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know when there might be a glimmer of hope and the end of lockdown might be in sight. And he was just everything that this country loves, a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of the war spirit. It was perfect. And he was just genuinely such a lovely man.
Oh, I can't imagine what it must have been like to actually meet him, because he's a little bit of a star in my eyes now. I absolutely stuck to that story with glue. You're so lucky. So you have written a book called Townie Spider, which sounds awesome. I'm going to buy it for my nieces for sure. It's doing really well. How did you come up with the idea for it? And how on earth did you get that done in amongst all of the lockdown and all of your family and work commitments?
Yeah, the inspiration for the story came from when my husband and I were getting married. My family are from the West Country, and at the time we were living in London. So we were driving down to the church that we wanted to get married in. We had a knackered old car. It was like a Fiat Punto. And there was this big spider that was on the wing mirror one weekend as we were driving down. And we got into the countryside and he was still there. And I said to my husband, I was like, he must be so confused as to where the hell he is. But so that's where the idea came from. And then I had a baby, so I'd gone on maternity leave, and I came back relatively early. I came back after maybe like 5.5, 6 months, and I got so much stick for it. And there's also so much pressure around new mums, but I was doing it because it was right for me. It was right for our family, like mentally, like mental health, well-being wise, is exactly what I needed to do. So yeah, and then I obviously felt hugely guilty, and sitting on my commute, because we then at this point lived in Bicester, which is near Oxfordshire, and commuted into London. So on my commute, I started writing poetry for my daughter. As an idea of kind of introducing themes of friendship and kindness and mental health and well-being to really young little people. And yeah, that's how the book came about. And it's quite hard to get a children's book published. There aren't many publishers that will take it up, because unless you're a very well-known celebrity like Tom Fletcher or David Walliams or that kind of ilk, then it's nigh on impossible. And you have to obviously get an illustrator on board. None of this stuff that I knew at the time, and eventually did get like Olympia Publishers took it up in the end. And yeah, so it came out, I think it was, I can't remember now, like 2018, 2019. But yeah, it was just really lovely to have something that I could give back to my daughter, as well as actually I thought it could be useful in the wider world. And, it's really hard to have these conversations with kids as to why it's important. They kind of do it naturally, children, anyway. They're kind of inherently kind. And someone once told me the reason we stop being kind is because we start to get embarrassed. So it's almost as though it's a societal thing. So I just thought it's a really good conversation and an easy way of introducing those themes to younger children.
I'm totally with you with that embarrassment thing. And, you mentioned just briefly there the guilt of going back to work. And even though it was right for you, there's so much pressure, isn't there, on women in that particular sense. And we end up with that sort of mum guilt about doing something. Did that sort of placate a little bit of that guilt because you'd been productive in that time in your family space?
I can't tell you how hard I found it. And I'm annoyed at myself that I was listening to everybody else apart from myself at this point. But I think it's just so overwhelming when you have your first child anyway. You're literally trying to keep this little person alive, and they don't come with instructions anyway. And I think it was just the one thing that I learned, maybe the hard way, was you just have to do what's right for you and your partner and whoever is in the house that you're in. You need to make it work, because there were moments when she would be very sick, and we were still trying to both have 9 to 5 jobs, and they weren't necessarily 9 to 5 jobs anyway, and just managing childcare, and then literally wanting to still be present and spending quality time with her. And it's literally like a barrage of things, and everybody does it differently. And there is no one size fits all, as I said before, but I just feel the judgment. And I don't know whether it's something that you put upon yourself, or, social media exacerbates it tenfold, if not more. Yeah. And it's probably one of the most challenging things I think I've probably ever done. And I still grapple with it on a daily basis now. And she's 4. So it's just...
Bless her.
Yeah.
Did your partner get paternity leave? Did you have to sort of figure that out? Was it as difficult for him in terms of guilt about leaving work, coming back?
No, I don't think so. I have type 1 diabetes, so the birthing experience was maybe a little bit different. But when she came into this world, she wasn't very well for about 2-3 weeks. They thought she might have a brain infection, like meningitis or something like that. So we had to spend quite a lot of time in the intensive care unit at John Radcliffe in Oxford. And he, again, very naively, we didn't know what we were doing at all. But my husband had just taken 2 weeks of paternity leave. So we literally came out of hospital, and the next day he went to work. And I was like, I was literally all over the shop. And I think one of our next door neighbours just kind of randomly turned up, not knowing that we'd literally just come out of hospital. And she came for a cup of tea, and I was like, please don't leave. I was like, please don't go. But it was just... It's so weird. I don't think you could ever really adequately prepare yourself for being a first-time parent. But it was,
I can imagine you just there, sat rocking in your chair.
A little bit, like not quite knowing what the hell had just happened. But
Bless you. Well, I'm glad that Townie Spider was born out of that experience, and that we have it now to go and give to our children and help them with issues such as mental health and that, which obviously as adults, they still continue, don't they?
Oh,
Bless
yes,
us all. I'd like to take you back into your own childhood, actually. And I'd just like to know what some of the stories that you had when you were growing up, what were the stories that sort of shaped you as a child? And who were your idols growing up?
Oh, gosh. So, wow. I probably got the most random, eclectic mix of kind of idols, I think. So everyone from Lisa Simpson from the cartoon fame. My first doll was a She-Ra. Do you remember He-Man and She-Ra?
She-Ra!
Big She-Ra fan. But also popular culture. So I love Saved by the Bell. My favourite character was Jessie Spano, which I think was Elizabeth Berkley's character. It was a bit of a swap, but I thought she was brilliant. And then Julia Stiles, her character in 10 Things I Hate About You.
That is literally one of my favourite films of all
It's just
time.
Incredible. And then I was a bit of a Shakespeare geek as well, and it's a reworking of Taming of the Shrew, isn't it? So
yeah. And wasn't Clueless supposed to be Emma as well?
Yes, exactly. And then like Laura Dern in Jurassic Park, but also I was a bit sporty, so I loved Denise Lewis, the heptathlete, and Sally Gunnell, who was a 400-meter hurdle runner, and then Steffi Graf, the tennis player. But also, I was thinking about this earlier, and I was discussing it with my husband, and I was like, actually, this is so weird. I can have only been about 7 years old, and bear with me on this, but it was the Conservative leadership race after Maggie Thatcher had been thrown off from Prime Minister when John Major became Prime Minister. But in the running were like Ken Clark and Michael Heseltine. I had the biggest crush on Michael Heseltine. I was 7 years old.
I love it. I love the inner workings of Kimberly Rowell, executive producer at the BBC.
Yeah, don't tell anyone.
Okay, anyone that's listening, don't spread it any further.
Never repeat these words. Yeah.
So if your family were here now, how do you think they would describe you back then, and how would they describe you now?
Oh, back then I was super annoying from a young child. I just wanted to change things, and I wanted to like be in and do everything. I wanted to be involved. So the amount of clubs that I did at school, just because I wanted to try everything and see if I liked it or see if I was any good at it. And I did a lot. Like I said, I did a lot of sports, but I also did a lot of kind of like drama stuff and some writing and some volunteering. I mean, I remember writing to our local newspaper, which was like the North Devon Gazette and Advertiser, saying, "You don't do anything for teenagers, let me write for you." And they did, and they gave me like £10 a week to do a column, which was I know, but like, so I was annoying. I was really annoying. And then I think mainly because of my diabetes, but I can't really excuse my behaviour on my diabetes, but I wanted to test the limits of things. So when I was a teenager, I was a bit of a, what's the word? I don't know. I used to go out every weekend, and I wasn't quite old enough, and I'd get into a lot of trouble and a lot of hair-raising experiences. And yeah, I was a bit of a nightmare. My poor mum and dad. I don't know. I worry about my own daughter now. I was like, please don't do this to me. I guess now, like, I've changed. I feel like I've changed loads, but I think I'm still fundamentally the same person. I've just evolved, and I know what matters to me and what's meaningful to me. So I still have all the same kind of personality traits, but I've maybe kind of learned how to use them, not just to my benefit, but to like to make meaningful and purposeful things. And I think also, since having my daughter, any work that I do, and obviously it means being away from her, I want it to be meaningful. And I think all of the kind of the good things that have happened in my career have happened after having her. So if anyone ever says to you that don't have kids, it will ruin your career, I'd argue the antithesis of that. Like, my career has never been better since having a daughter. So that's, two fingers up to them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, that is completely playing into your testing the limits of those sort of societal rules, and also your physical self and your mental self. Having a child and trying to do the job that you have, there's a lot of rebellion that must play out in that scenario in terms of proving people wrong.
Yeah, completely. And I think that maybe that is kind of like the main thread and the main kind of stream of consciousness in me. I want to prove people wrong, and I don't like stereotypes, and I don't like being pigeonholed, and I want to just be able to do and experience what I want to do, really, not selfishly necessarily, but I think it's very much wrapped up in my own self-worth and happiness is,
I utterly agree. I mean, you're on a podcast called The Brave Moment for a reason. And I feel like we must have been kindred spirits when we were young, because I was definitely in your camp of trying to test those limits and see what I could not get away with necessarily, but just to see if I could expand myself and push that comfort zone just a little bit further each time. And yeah, it pleases me to know that hasn't changed in you, and that it's still recognisable to you yourself.
Oh, it's definitely really still there, for sure.
So what is one common misconception that people have about you?
Again, I was kind of thinking about this, and I thought it's interesting, and maybe it's also a hangover from my younger days. Is I was so eager to please. I was, almost falling over myself to make people like me or to fit in. And I think some of it comes from not being acknowledged. And like I say, growing up in North Devon and maybe not having as many kind of opportunities as I could have or should have, I don't know. But I was always falling over myself to try and make everybody like me. And one of the hardest lessons I learned in life is that you can't. Some people just won't like you. Some people you just won't get on with. You'll either clash or they just won't even try, and it's beyond your control. So yeah, it's interesting. And I've kind of, again, grown out of that now. I've either grown out of it or I've got a thicker skin, or I'm just so time poor I don't have time to worry about it. It's just... yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, that's probably one of a little bit of a regret, I guess, because I think it caused me quite a lot of unhappiness. I remember I never really got any sense of satisfaction out of it, and trying to be included or trying to make people include me. I wasn't unpopular, and I think, like everybody, I probably was a little bit bullied, but not extensively. But I don't. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd maybe want to kind of redress that if I could go back to my younger self and say, like, just chill out, it's fine.
Oh, I'm so with you. I went to Devonport High School for girls, and had a very, very similar experience in terms of I think when you're just in with your own sex and you're in quite a competitive environment in terms of intellectualism, you find yourself either competing or trying so hard to fit in, you almost end up sort of screwing that up and becoming a black sheep, because people just get pissed off with you, don't they?
Yeah, or they're just like, shut up. Or like, they keep you at arm's length because you're annoying, really. But I don't know. It's just, I think there's again everything in equal measure, maybe. But yeah, I think back on it and I think, I'm not so fond of that memory. So
what do you think teenage Kimberly would think of your career now? Do you think she'd be impressed with you, or if it was up to her, what would you be doing?
Oh yeah, I think she would never have believed it. It sounds really egotistical, doesn't it? But I think I studied broadcast journalism at Leeds, and I did that because I thought I wanted to read the news, and then quickly found that reporting, like journalism, the actual kind of hard and fast of it on a day-to-day basis, as in like the reporting correspondent type role, I didn't like. It was too nosy and it was too intrusive and that kind of thing. And I did a lot of work experience just to try and test the water in some other avenues, and fell into like TV production. And I never for a million years, like my first big move was from 2-4 Broadcast in Plymouth. I went and got a job at GMTV, and there's definitely some kind of element of serendipity in play, because I'd been trying to move to London to be with my then boyfriend at the time, because that's where he was. But to work for GMTV, I would never have imagined in my wildest dreams that ever would have happened. And apparently the story goes is that they'd gone through a load of people and hadn't found the right candidate for the job. And then they turned the CVs upside down, and my CV was on the bottom and they interviewed me and hired me. So like, it's just... those elements of serendipity and fate is I can't be more thankful for. But yeah, teenage me would be, I don't know, incredulous, I think, or just a little bit surprised, maybe.
Because she was a kickboxer, wasn't she, at one point?
Yeah, no, I've got a black belt in kickboxing, so. This is me just, again, testing the limits of everything. I was really in, like, I had sporting heroes who were mainly runners, but I used to do a lot of running. I ran for North Devon in, like, the 100 and 200 metres. And then I got bored of that and then thought, what can I do next? And I joined a local kickboxing academy in Barnstaple in North Devon. And I got my black belt in kickboxing. So.
Of course you did, Kim.
Yeah. I told you I'm annoying. I'm really annoying.
But inspiring, and that's what we like here at the Brave Move. I want to take you back to that GMTV interview, only because I'm so curious as to how that went. Can you remember what you felt like when you walked into that interview?
Oh, hugely intimidated in every sense of the word. And I think I'd had a few interviews and I'd not got any of them. And I was a little bit, not despondent, but like, I've got nothing to lose. So let's just go in here, all guns blazing. And yeah, I think I actually not fell out, I had a heated discussion, shall we say, with the hiring manager. But she was quite quirky. It was a lady called Nog Sorden. I'll never forget her. She was
cool name.
Yeah, her name was actually Margaret, but their nickname was Nog. And she actually gave us all a spelling test because she was really hot on grammar and punctuation and things. I remember that too. But yeah, so we had a bit of a disagreement, and then she actually quite liked it. And when I thought I might be onto something, I think the HR resources woman was kind of saying, oh, you know, Nog, you're going to miss your train. Do you not have to go? And she goes, oh, no, there's one a bit later. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, maybe she actually likes me. But but yeah, I didn't think that in my wildest dreams I would ever get a job. Like it was walking up to the ITV building, which used to be on South Bank, which I think they've now knocked down. But they used to have ITV studios where they did the Graham Norton show and the Jonathan Ross and Anton Deck's Saturday Night Takeaway, all in this building on the studio floor level. And then all the offices were above it. And even just walking to that building, it was a really ugly building. But it was, you walk into the reception, it's got all these pictures of all these famous people that work at ITV, and you're just kind of overawed by the whole thing. And little me, who was in like early 20s, just didn't think I really grasped the gravitas of it, you know. And I just kind of, like I say, I probably just thought, sod it, I'll give it a go, see what happens.
So when you went into that situation, did you have any kind of imposter syndrome, or like you said, was it that you didn't quite grasp what you were walking into and therefore it didn't really faze you?
I think in that specific example, I was a bit, what the hell? But 100, like for every job I've ever gone for since then, and even now in like my day-to-day working life, imposter syndrome is something you wrangle with every kind of other minute. It's such a challenge. It just, why me? Why not someone else? Why am I good enough? Why aren't they getting someone else to do this? Is what I've done good enough? Is someone going to see through me? Are they going to realise that they've got the wrong person doing this? You know, I think, again, unfortunately, it's something that's inherent within all of us, that we just question it. And I also don't think it's just limited to women, because I speak to my husband about it, and he definitely has the same kind of feelings around the work that he does. And I don't know why we do this to ourselves, and I don't know why I do it to myself, because life would be an awful lot easier, and I certainly get more hours work done in the day. But it's just, I think that an element of self-deprecation is good, but not to the point where you're actually questioning your every move, or you know, because if you're in a role, at least, you know, 2 or 3 very important people think you should be doing it. So run with that sentiment, run with the idea that you were hired to do this out of however many candidates that were, you know, just had also applied and were probably just as skilled, or if not more, but just, you know, kind of revel in your own greatness, I suppose, because we're all different, and that's what kind of makes life fun and interesting, is the fact, but also the little nuances that you can bring to it, or the little idiosyncrasies of your own personality, or the way you operate, or the way you talk to people, or just the way you perform generally. That's why they've hired you, so try and just bear that in mind.
I absolutely agree. And it's actually something that I have to tell myself quite often. I have this little phrase, which is so super cheesy. It is the phrase, I am enough. And I have to consistently, whenever I'm in a moment, like even just before interviewing yourself, knowing that, you know, you are so amazing at your job and you've got accolades coming off each arm. And I had to say to myself, come on, you know, I am enough. I'm just another woman doing my job. And therefore we can add to each other in that space. Now, I think like some of the imposter syndrome comes from feeling that someone is above you or unequal to you in some way, and therefore having to try and live up to an expectation.
But for me, it's really weird to hear you say that, because I don't think of myself like that, and I will like literally chat till the cows come home about anything. So I think, you know, I think we do ourselves a disservice, don't we? And it's nonsensical sometimes, because, you know, I think it can be, I think some people in some situations can be unnecessarily difficult, and that is where these feelings have come from, because we probably can all recollect a time where we've spoken or had an interaction and we've come out of it feeling like crap. And I think that's where like these little seeds of doubt then start to creep in and manifest and become way bigger than they should be, because the majority of the people like want you to do well, and they want you to feel like you are good enough, and 9 times out of 10 you are.
There you go. That's a mic drop moment right there. So talking of being good enough and feeling good about your work, can you remember a time where you thought, wow, this is what I do for a living? Can you describe that moment to us?
Yeah. This was quite surreal. I was in this sounds like I'm just like clang, I've dropped a name. So I was in Princess Diana's living room at Kensington Palace, about to record Prince Harry talking to Bryony Gordon about his mother's death, because I think it was either the 20th or the 21st anniversary of her death, and he'd chosen to record the first episode of Bryony's new podcast, which was called Mad World, and we'd all gone to Kensington Palace to record it with him, and then we ended up doing a couple of series of the podcast and another like motivational one. But yeah, that was a moment, and I think this was a month again after I'd come back from maternity leave, and it was one of those like, I don't think at the time I was like, wow, here I am kind of thing. But in retrospect, it was a bit surreal. And actually, that was the day of the Westminster terror attacks too. So straight after our interview, he was whisked away to a secure room just because of the high terrorism threat. So, and also I had to ring my husband and was like, can you go get our daughter from nursery? Because
I'm in this situation
trapped.
at work.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that, I think that when you ask me that question, that's what kind of springs to mind. But there have been lots of little moments. Like, I'm very fortunate to be part of a network called the Women of the Future Network. And before lockdown, literally just before lockdown, so like around about this time last year, we went out to Cambodia and we were guests of the ambassador of Cambodia. And we had round tables with NGOs talking about human trafficking and women's rights in the country, and we spoke to the UN, and it was just the most inexplicably bizarre moment of my life, but also probably one of the most fulfilling, and just the conversations and the access and just to even be part of it was just beyond my wildest dreams. I literally grew up in a single parent household in middle of nowhere in North Devon, and then all of a sudden I was with the head of the UN and the ambassador for Cambodia talking about the slave trade. It was just, I don't know, like pinch yourself, what happened kind of moment.
I can't imagine what that must have felt like, but also just that as a woman being part of that conversation, being part of that world, that must have been incredible to be there, and also because of your work. You talk about imposter syndrome. That was probably one of my biggest moments, because also the other women that were part of the delegation, there was a head of a bank, there's a woman who's just been awarded an MBE, there's the head of the American Red Cross charity. They'd all part of the same delegation. And I was like, what? Why am I here? What did I do? I don't get it. But yeah, I don't know. And it was so remarkable, and I'm so hugely grateful. And I think you have to stay humble and remember why you're there and the reasoning why they might have wanted to bring you to the table, and adding your voice to lots of others. And I think also it's something that's kind of sprung out of last year as well, was kind of all the resurgence of BLM and things like that. I've never been more aware of my own white privilege and what I have over other people. And I don't think it's ever harmful to just be checked on that, and just to be made to have some perspective on how fortunate you are in life. And I got a lot of that out of it too. Talking about one of those pinch yourself moments. So I went out to Vietnam before the lockdown with a couple of creatives to work for a foundation called the Animals Asia Foundation, which is run by a wonderful woman called Jill Robinson, who is a white English woman in Asia, trying to create change there. And I can remember I was sat there and we were talking about some sensitive issues, and there was a whole heap of different people, very, very diverse group that we all were, and half of them were having to switch their phones off. And so I asked, because, talking again about white privilege and learning about how other cultures have to operate, I just asked, why is everyone switching off their phones? And these people that were from different parts of Asia, they were saying, well, we have to switch them off because the government will be listening in. And suddenly I was like, what? Are you kidding? Seriously.
Wow.
Seriously. And I learned a lot about governmental issues that day and how people in different countries operate. And I was completely oblivious. The things that I take for granted on that level were suddenly just all completely blasted open. And like you said, with the BLM movement last year, I don't think I've ever been so aware. And one of the things that I love about your work is that you're winning awards for your knowledge and your observation of diversity within the programming that you're bringing across, which I think is so important. And, when did that start for you? When did you start thinking to yourself, you know what, I really need to look at this and I really need to impact, with my job, what's being put out there to the nation?
Yeah, I think I always find it such a fine line to tread because clearly I'm not from a BAME background, but I feel like I have an awful lot to offer in regards to kind of socio-economic background because I'm from like a lower class family, really. I grew up in North Devon. My mum was a single parent for a fair few years before she married my stepdad, and we were like hugely fortunate because he's a remarkable father figure to me. But I feel like having grown up in the sticks and had to like scrabble around for being able to pay the bills, like I did a video at Christmas because my mum had to sell her engagement ring to pay the car tax or something one year, and we found a replica for her for Christmas and we gave it to her. And I put it on Twitter and it went viral. Like I didn't mean for that to that wasn't my intention. I just wanted it like a feel good thing, and it makes me quite emotional just talking about it. But I think you struggle, and I think even being a woman, I know as much as it's not maybe as bad as it used to be, but I've had some really terrible male bosses, like really terrible, just for very simple reasons. And you always just think, but you've got mothers and you've got sisters and wives, and why can you not think about things from their perspective when you're approaching how you speak to people or how you try, just to encourage younger women. Like you can't be what you can't see. So if you're shooting down me or another female counterpart or someone you work with, it's going to set them back far further than it would for a male counterpart, arguably, but just because of the way, all the things we've talked about, imposter syndrome, resilience, confidence, all those kinds of things. But when it comes to like reflecting it in my work, it's just like as we started the conversation, it's just making sure that you're creating an environment with the work that you're doing that you can encourage people to have an open dialogue about these types of subject matter and genres of film. And we did a piece literally just after the George Floyd's death and the BLM resurgence, which was called Go Back to Where You Came From, which was British nationals who'd been told at various points in their lives to go home when they're all actually born and bred in this country. And it was an exploration of race, identity, white privilege. And it was such a hard documentary to actually physically get signed off by all of the channel runners and things like that, because the BBC itself at that point had been slapped on the wrist for the use of the N-word in news bulletins and things like that. And we don't always get it right. And it was, like I say, it was a really fine line to walk. And we have to be mindful of, if we're telling those kinds of stories, not only do you have to have the right people in front of the camera, you need to have the right people behind the camera. And, being again like a white, now middle class female exec, it's a challenge to say like, well, why should I be doing that? Why should I be telling those stories? And it's a constant education for myself to just you have to try every single day to be mindful, to be representative, but also just to consider what it means to the wider audience and the people that are climbing up the ladder, the same ladder that I had to navigate. So yeah, it's a big challenge.
I was just thinking about, as you were saying that as well, I watched your the documentary that you put out called Stop and Search, which kind of explores that thing where, policemen can stop whoever they want to and search them, and just what happens to people on the streets and how they decide to stop and search those people and the consequences that happen from that. And that was utterly eye-opening.
Yeah, it was it was heartbreaking almost to make it, to be honest, because the BAME people from BAME backgrounds are far, 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 far more likely to be stopped and searched by the police just for being from a BAME background. And we kind of explored the reasoning behind that. We spoke to the West Midlands Police Commissioner, who was a young black guy himself. And, you just try and understand it from where they're coming from. But also they've developed mobile apps now. So if you are being stopped and searched, you can record what's happening just by shaking your phone, without conscious, so they don't see what you're doing necessarily, but you've got a record of it and it's uploaded straight away to a database and all of those kinds of things. And you think even just to have to consider that as an option for you to live your day-to-day life, that's horrific in today's society. But stuff like that is still going on and still a massive consideration. It's heartbreaking. Well,
I'm glad that someone like you is behind it and that you're bringing it to our attention. And I think it's really, really important. And hopefully, other, programming can look at that and learn from it and progress with it, which, fingers crossed, it's starting to happen now, especially on sort of streaming services like Netflix as well.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. So talking of, diversity, you have won quite a few awards, my lovely lady, all of which are absolutely well-deserved. But which one was the most poignant for you? And how did it change your perspective emotionally?
Without a doubt, the Women of the Future award that I got in 2018 changed my life. I don't really know how or... But the lovely thing, and whenever I talk about it, it always sounds like I'm a member of a cult, and I don't mean this to come across this way. But I saw the opportunity and I applied for it, and I just thought, this just sounds fantastic, And I'd done a lot of work within the mental health space at that point, and so I wanted to kind of put myself forward for the award, which sounds bizarre in itself, but the way that you normally get judged for these awards is just on paper. So whether it's like your CV or your credentials or whatever you put into the entry box. But the different thing about this one was that they interview you as they shortlist, and then they interview the final few candidates. So I had to go and speak to them, and it just felt a lot more realistic to me. They weren't just looking at who you are and how you appear on paper. They really wanted to get under the skin of what your motivations were, and if you were keen to invest in the idea of paying it forward and being a mentor and like a guiding light to other people and other women within the same kind of industries. And I think even just having those conversations with them. I think whenever you're interviewed, it's not just you being interviewed. You need to interview the company to see if you want to be part of it. But this process just seemed a lot more like how it all should be, how life should be, how work should be, how we all operate. And then I remember going to the awards ceremony, not thinking in a million years that I'd win it. I think I was in the same category as Sophie Faldo, who I think won Great Bake Off. Did she win? Yeah. And Emma Gannon, who does Control Alt Delete and a massive podcast. And I was like, there is not a chance in hell. So, and also the award was right at the end of the evening, and someone at my table had already got an award. And I was like, well, that's it. That's the award for this table. But so I got a little bit piddly, to be honest. And it came to my award, and my name came up, and my husband was like, Kim, you've won. You need to move. You need to get up there. And I just, But then since that moment, they've been so supportive to me, and they've opened so many doors for me. And I've been made redundant 3 times in my life over a space of 5 years, which obviously a lot for anybody. But the day after I'd won the award, I had the award on my desk at work, and I was told I was being made redundant. This was for the 3rd time. So to kind of go, like, the literally ultimate high to the lowest low. And yeah, as part of that redundancy process, I offered to start a podcast for them where I speak to their alumni and people that are affiliated to the programme about their own lives in the hope of like inspiring other people. So I launched that in my 3rd redundancy period. Just have something to do more than, to be honest. But and it's just, like I say, I went to Cambodia with them. It's just, and their networks and the kind of sessions that they run and the people that they have access to it's been life-changing for me. And I don't you don't realise or you don't appreciate these things. But some networks aren't necessarily much use to you. But this one is, I'm still in touch with them today. And their founder, Pinky, calls me up all the time, which is very random.
Pinky!
Yeah, she's a little Indian lady who is just the most awesome woman in the world. But it's just it feels like a big family. Like I said, it feels like I've joined a cult, but like the nicest cult in the world. So
the most supportive, happy cult. Oh, that's so wonderful. I'm really, really intrigued, obviously as a podcaster as well, how you're finding that podcast, and is it still giving you that same passion as when you won the award and started it up in that moment of adversity?
Yeah, I think I'm quite nosy as a person, so I always just like asking people questions, and I think, well, if they don't want to answer it, they'll just stay silent or say no. So it's been, I think now, particularly during the pandemic, everyone seems to have started a podcast, but which is good, obviously, because there's lots of choice out there. But also, I find it, again, I was talking about escapism earlier, I find it like an element of escapism for me, because I find I edit the audio and things, and I find that quite cathartic, and there's quite I just enjoy it. So it's become a hobby for me. And some of the conversations I've been fortunate to have, I managed to get Cherie Blair on the podcast, and Jess Phillips has been on the podcast, and some more high profile men. We've only had 3 men. I think I've had 40 guests and only 4 of them have been men. So but make them work for it. But no, I really enjoy the podcast space, and I've become a bit more picky about the podcasts that I listen to myself. But I think, it's quite niche, isn't it, now, the podcasting world? And there's so many genres and subgenres, so there's probably something for everybody out there.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about success, because obviously you have had a lot of recognition for your success, and like I've said, rightly so. But what's your own sort of personal criteria for it? Because sometimes, like mine is just being able to get up and make a cup of tea in the morning and not be disturbed by my husband. So what is that? What is that for you?
What does success look like? That's a really good question, and I have, in all honesty, personally, I've struggled with my own mental health at various points, and sometimes it's still a big challenge for me. And even through the periods of redundancies, that was one of the hardest things, because even the word redundant means there's no use for you, and it took me a while to realise it was the role that was redundant and not me necessarily. But I suppose success for me now always harks back to whatever it is that makes you happy. And that's quite personal. But to me now, it's my husband and my daughter and my mum and my dad. That's where I'm at my happiest. And I think that's also something you really need to remember when you get bogged down with work and projects. And does it matter? I think that someone once said to me, if you've got the choice of going to your child's nativity, or someone said you need to finish this project, what is going to matter more in 5 years' time? The fact that you didn't go to the nativity, or the fact that you can't even remember the name of the project that you were supposed to finish, So I think success is just, like you say, it can be as simple as just putting your game face on and going and making a cup of tea and being ready for whatever the day throws at you. That's, I think, sometimes the simplest things to me have even just been getting up in the first place, when you're in your kind of really bleak moments. But I think, just that there are things that you should get up for. Maybe it is as you get older, and with all the lived experience you have, it gives life more meaning and more purpose and more drive. But it is hard. I think it's really hard, and I know it's very subjective for everybody out there, but I suppose it's just also having people remember you fondly, or just remembering the nice things that you did. I mean, kindness is a huge thing for me, and I don't think you can underestimate the power of kindness, particularly in leadership. But I think success is what makes you happy, really.
Exactly that. And it's something that you kind of learn, I think, with age as well, because in the beginning, you're kind of you're just striving for a job. You just want to get your rent in. You might have a boyfriend, you might not, or, vice versa. And it's not on your mind, is it? That happiness almost becomes a second priority. And then as you get older and you get sort of more set in your ways with your career, that's when you start to reflect on that that part of your life, and it does become more important the older that you get. And I'm just thinking, you know, as you're saying that, you know, you were made redundant 3 times, it just goes to show that anybody, regardless of who you are or what you know, can always be in that vulnerable position. When you're in those redundancy moments, how did you get yourself out of it in terms of your mind? And for those people that through maybe this pandemic have been made redundant, what advice can you give them just to make it through to that happier space?
Gosh, yeah, it's so hard. And each of the redundancies kind of was slightly different, I guess. The first one, I was mid-20s and I thought it was the end of the world and I literally couldn't get out of bed in the morning. But I think establishing a routine is key. Like, I think also they say this to people who retire as well. But, you know, just literally getting up for something or making an appointment that you can't necessarily break, or, you know, a commitment to yourself to do a project or call a friend or call a family member. You know, literally having a routine, and exercise is phenomenally helpful. I used to swim a lot through periods of redundancy, but also, I mean, when you do break out of the really darkest moments, think about the things that you've been putting off because of your career. Like, I've written books, I've written stories, I've started a podcast. You know, it's all those things that you think, oh, I'd love to do that one day. And you have that moment to literally think about, well, I probably could have a bit of time now. And obviously you might not necessarily have the money to support it, but you can at least put wheels in motion or start having the right kinds of conversation that can lead you to that point of feeling as though you're still being productive in some way. I think that's the challenge. It's losing the sense of purpose. So you need to try and figure out what it is that would give that back to you, whether it's on a really small scale, even like, I think, offering to iron shirts, or, you know, just literally giving you some kind of sense of gratification. That's the biggest challenging moments. And I remember in one period of redundancy, it was over Christmas, and I needed money, really. So I started working at Clinton Cards. And they put me in charge. This is so, I'm laughing already. But they put me in charge of this store that was closing down in Oxford, in what is now the Westgate Centre. So they did eventually demolish it, thank God. But at one point, I was so terrible. I didn't know how to cash up and lock down, but they'd left it to me to do, obviously. And then I got locked in the shopping centre because it had taken me so long to do it because I couldn't figure it out. They locked me in the shopping centre. I was like, oh my actual God. And I had to go. And luckily the girls at Primark were still folding up jumpers. So I literally bang on the door. They thought I was crazy first off, and then eventually let me in. And then I went out through the back and round by the bins and got out of the shopping centre. But I was like, oh, if this is not a moment to reflect on. But then it's really surreal. When I got to do a TED Talk. The TED Talk was in Oxford, and literally just before my TED Talk, I went to Westgate, and I was like, this is just so bizarre. This is where I used to work about 2 or 3 years ago, and now I'm going to go to the Oxford Library and do a TED Talk. It was this, literally, it could not have been more surreal or highs and lows. It was ridiculous. Yeah, I'm
just trying to envision that myself, how I would feel in that moment.
I was like, you cannot stay here overnight. That was my decision. I am not going to sleep in this shopping centre. But it was,
and yet there are so many movies about staying overnight in a shopping centre and what you do.
So how do I get out? I was literally panicking, but oh, my life. Anyway,
that is absolutely brilliant, and it has made me giggle for days. I love it. So, talking about your job to date, take us through sort of a typical day. What do you have to do? Do you have a morning ritual to sort of get yourself up and keep yourself going? What does that day look like for you?
Well, at the moment, we're normally rudely awoken by our daughter sometime between 5 and 6:30, which is always a pleasure. Yeah, so that starts the day. And then she's preschool age, and she's still going to preschool, thankfully, because I think she's a very sociable child, and taking her out would have been a really bad idea. But so she'll go to preschool, and then I'll get myself ready and myself set up. And I've literally just moved like my office working from home setting upstairs so that I can actually close the door on it, because I was working from a little table at the sofa, which was the worst idea in the world. But yeah, and then I'll kind of sit and join in calls from about 9, half 9, and then it's really like you can be involved in lots of different things, like commissioning meetings, production meetings, signing off risk assessments, looking at call sheets, watching videos, watching like reversions of things to go on social media, and lots of different things really. And normally finishes around 6ish, and then kind of just wind down for the evening.
What you're describing sounds pretty relentless in terms of what you have to do day by day. What do you think is sort of like the biggest challenge in balancing that home life with your career? And what tips would you give to other people, especially fellow mothers who are trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, I don't always get it right, like, first and foremost. And there will be days where you just think you're doing it all wrong, and you're not seeing your child, or you're not spending any quality time with your husband and all of that kind of thing. And that you've got to kind of take the rough with the smooth. And also just remember that, like, one of my favourite sayings is, this too shall pass. So if it's brilliant, it'll end. If it's crap, it'll end. If it's irrelevant, it's going to end too. So everything will end at some point, apart from maybe the pandemic. But and I think the key thing is to just set boundaries, and something that I know I need to get better at. But if you're signing off, stay signed off. Don't check your emails. Don't let that interrupt, because if you've got one eye on something, you're never fully present. And again, I should practice what I preach an awful lot more. But I think that's key. You'll go bonkers. You can't always be on. You need that downtime. You need that headspace. So just be your self-care, isn't it? Just relaxing, taking the time. You are allowed to sit and do nothing. You can read it. You can read a book. You can do what you want. Do something for you that's important for you, to just take a breath and, take a pause. And you need that in your daily life, and you need it in your daily routine. So try and factor it in whenever you can. It doesn't have to be the same time every day, because I know with me, like, my day doesn't always work like that. I can't always go out at 1 o'clock. So, but just try and say, well, I'm having that half an hour, I'm having those 45 minutes to do something for me, and take a break and walk away from the screen and turn it off, and just be inaccessible for those moments.
That's really, really good advice, and something that I'm trying to practice now myself in turning the screen off, because now obviously we are so screen involved, and it is zapping. It's so
it really is.
Zapping.
It's impossible. And it's so hard.
It is completely impossible. And half the time you find yourself procrastinating, scrolling through social media because you just want to avoid the work. And then the other time you're just like, right, I've just got to get it done. So you spend hours and hours in front of that screen. So that's absolutely wonderful advice. Thank you for that. It is called The Brave Moment, this particular podcast. So I have to ask you that crucial question. What do you consider to be your bravest moment, either personally, spiritually, or emotionally, in retrospect now? What is that moment that sort of changed you, and how do you live by it today?
I have a couple of things, if that's okay. I'm not sure if I'm allowed.
Go for it. Of course you are.
The first thing, I think being brave means you need to be vulnerable, and that's the hardest part, isn't it? It's literally opening yourself up for come what may. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But the first kind of bravest moment, I've never really spoken about this, but when I was relatively young, I was in quite a toxic relationship, and I wasn't actually going to go to university because I was so infatuated with this person, but I did, and we moved up together. And I didn't realise at the time, because maybe it just wasn't spoken about, or I'd never heard the term until like a few years ago, but he was massively gaslighting me. He was so kind of psychologically manipulating me, and it was a pretty horrific relationship all round. And it got to a point where I was at university. I just got through my first year, and I kind of knew through my own moral compass that this wasn't going to be forever, but I'd never really taken the chance to completely break it off. I'd always kind of half-heartedly attempted it. And I was really young and a bit stupid. And then one evening I went out with another friend and I ended up, this is very kind of like teenage, but I ended up kissing another bloke, and he got furious about it. And I went back and we kind of had a bit of a fight, quite a physical fight that I've still got like scars on my hands from and things like that. And I ended up having to move all of my stuff out in bin bags, even though I paid for the flat that we lived in. And so he chucked me out and he piled up all my clothes, and he weed all over my clothes and all this kind of stuff. And then we called the police, and I was up in Leeds and my parents were down in Barnstable. So it was a 6-hour drive for them to get up, and I had to wait for them to arrive. And then we moved all my stuff out in bin bags. And I was like I said, I was that early 20s, and it was quite a trauma, but I was quite proud of myself for eventually getting to the point where I realised this wasn't me, this wasn't my life, this wasn't what I wanted. And it took such a lot of strength and a lot of kind of, I don't know, I had to be ready to do it for myself, I guess, which is where the biggest challenge came from, because everyone was telling me how toxic it was and how no good he was. And I'd always defend him. And, you know, and then obviously there were a few little bits of back and forth after that, but ultimately we stayed apart, we stayed, you know, broken up. But it was probably one of the most challenging parts of my life, and it kind of badly shaped my university experience. I was never a massive fan of university, and like I said, I didn't necessarily want to go, but yeah, moving in with him rather than moving into halls wasn't the best way to start, I don't think. But I managed to reconnect with some course friends and then stayed at university. And one of my good friends, I stayed at hers because she was at Sheffield, and I did my first year exams and all this kind of stuff. So I managed to navigate my way through it, but that was probably one of the hardest moments. And I don't really talk about it because I feel a bit stupid about it, I guess. But I guess it's also one of those kind of fundamental blocks in life that has helped me get to where I am. And yeah,
I really connect with that story, and my heart is absolutely beating fast as you're saying it. And funnily enough, we've taken a sort of similar trajectory. So I had the same experience with a very physical narcissist, very, very charming on the outside, but behind closed doors. It got to the point where he'd weigh me each week because I wasn't allowed to go a certain weight, and he'd want me to dress in a certain way, and it was all very much like that. And I felt so stupid that I put myself in that position. But then, you know, like yourself, you learn how to sort of justify and accept and surrender to that trauma and try and live with it. I don't think it ever really goes, does it? You just sort of transmute it into something different.
I feel like it's part of my formative history, which is probably something that I've learned to even kind of pigeonhole it by saying that, or compartmentalize it by saying that. But I think I always knew, like I say, because I was so young, I think I always knew that I was going to work through it. It's easy to say that now because I did. I'm not sure if I ever really anticipated staying with him, but it always comes back for me to like my moral compass. I do know the difference between right and wrong, and I could tell that this was hugely wrong and unacceptable. And it's weird to even talk about it now because it is probably literally about 20 years ago. So it's crazy times.
What have been some of your other brave moments?
Oh, well, I've got one coming up. I've written another book. This one's for adults. But it's kind of part self-help, kind of part memoir, where I wanted to address some of the stuff we've been talking about, really, the importance of perspective, how to build confidence when you're at your lowest ebb, how to overcome and use vulnerability, imposter syndrome, and the importance of reframing and how to turn negatives into positives. So I've kind of structured it into chapters, and at the end of each chapter are kind of little exercises to help whoever's reading to put to good use and into working practice all of the information that's just come from each section. And it's interspersed with little quotes from the Women of the Future podcast, because I've spoken to some hugely inspirational people. But the kind of element of risk and maybe bravery is that it's going to be crowdfunded. So it's with a publisher called Unbound Publishing, who are quite like well known and all of that kind of thing. But I'm a little bit terrified that no one is going to want to read it. But
I'll read it, Kim. I'll be buying it.
Thanks so much. But I'm hoping it will do okay. And I wrote it in the last lockdown after having kind of had something in my arsenal for a little while. And I don't know, it's hard, isn't it? It's like putting your baby out there to see if anyone says that it's a nice baby or it's a pretty baby, or I don't know, it's like one ugly baby. But we'll see how that goes.
We'll drop the link to that, if you wouldn't mind, it into your show notes for this episode, so that people can follow that, because I'm sure that we'll all be there supporting you, because it sounds fabulous. It's definitely,
please.
My goodness, we are there. It will be everyone's birthday present for the following year, I promise.
Thank you.
So just before we finish this amazing interview, thank you so much for your time, because I know it's so crucial.
Oh no, it's fine. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. So for those that are creating their own stories, be them written, filming or otherwise, what important things should they remember, and what do you wish you'd known when you first started out?
The easiest stories to tell, some of the best stories that have ever been written or filmed or just portrayed generally, are from people that know exactly what they're talking about. And 9 times out of 10, that comes from lived experience. So don't be afraid. Obviously, these things can be hugely personal and you may not want to talk about it, or you might not be ready to talk about it. So if that's the case, invest in yourself and give yourself time. And that can also mean like skill sets, like learn your trade, learn your craft. I think some of the most frustrating things that I've experienced are people that just try to run before they can walk, which is also something that my husband accuses me of as well. But sometimes you actually do need to physically understand your craft if it's kind of camera skills. I mean, I started as a runner, and I think that was never more important in my career, because you have an appreciation for every kind of level of the hierarchy, because inevitably there will be a hierarchy. So take the time to learn and understand whatever field you're in, but also explore your passions, talking about what makes you happy. What things, if you're not going to get that out of your job, which hopefully your job will make you happy, what things can you do to just ensure that your life is full and you're doing what you want to do? And you get one shot at this thing called life, so you might as well give it your best and just try and keep perspective, stay grounded, stay true to yourself, and surround yourself with all the people that bring that out of you. That was such wonderful advice, and I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed listening to everything you've had to say today. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kat. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. It's been really fun. It has been awesome, and I everything that you've said, I'm just going to take it away and absorb it. Well, thank you for all you do too. This podcast is brilliant. Such a great platform to hear such diverse and different stories from people from all walks of life. So thank you for this podcast, really. Oh, it's such a pleasure, love. I don't know if I've got another. So for those people that have been interested in what you've had to say today, what are your social handles? Where can they find you? And those all important books that you've been talking about, where can they purchase them? So my Twitter and my Instagram is at Kim Rowell TV, and Rowell is like cowl but with an R. A little bit of me dies every time I say that. But yes, and I'm in all the usual places. But I will undoubtedly be annoying everybody by publicising the book, which is called Occupied: Why You Are So Much More Than Your Job. So that will be the name of the book, hopefully. Oh, snap! I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kim, and enjoy the rest of your lockdown, and hopefully we'll see you on the other side free and easy. Thank you, Kat. Thanks so much. Kim is a woman trying her best to bring about change in the public space. She has literally made it her life's work to start a conversation on the stories that matter. And even if it means laying awake at night hoping not to receive threats from those that she challenges, she will do it because she recognises that story is bigger than her own. I'm reminded of Maya Angelou's quote, "Speak your truth even if your voice shakes," and Kim has chosen truth. In doing so, she has found that there are more people like her out there, that when one person speaks up, so will another and another. And so, the truly difficult conversations that we need to have can go ahead in a space where people lift you up and support you.
Even though we live in a world where sometimes it's hard to find those supportive spaces to create change, Kim shows us that if you are passionate, if you are willing to put in the time to explore, find and participate in activities, groups or communities, or even be brave enough to create that initial space yourself for the stories that compel you, you will find your tribe and your own rhythm. She tells us that as long as you can remain authentic, as long as the story you're telling means something to you, you are the right person for the job, even if that means employing others' expertise on the obstacles in your path or learning a new skill set in order to tell it properly. Some of the most poignant and compelling stories have been filmed on phones, sketched on paper, or have been a single powerful photo. If it means something to you, it will mean something to someone else. Kim believes that as long as you remember the 3 following points to your story, style and tone, storytelling techniques, and the element of escapism, and put your audience, people, and characters first, then no matter how you produce that story, it's a story worthy of grabbing the attention of others. If you watch Kim's Tedx talk on why story matters, she explains the elements of creating such stories in a little more detail. Talking of TED Talks, hearing the cyclical nature of Kim's own story from becoming a retail assistant at Clinton Cards to literally walking past her old life and into her public speaking next life is inspiration in itself. Being made redundant, as Kim points out, comes with an abundance of emotion, from feeling displaced, undervalued and unworthy, to literally feeling that there isn't a place for you where there once was. In those times in our lives where we are made to feel that way, Kim reminds us that in order not to sink, a routine or plan of action can really help to maintain a sense of purpose and validity. Your circumstances are not you, the person. They are just your situation, and having the energy to change that situation can only be generated through the choices you make next. Just as imposter syndrome can make you feel as if you are not the right person for the job, redundancy can have the same effect if you let it. So start with something simple to pick you up and get you through. For me, it is the phrase, "I am enough." And I, like everyone else, have a body, mind and heart, and only I have the right to govern how I use it and my time on this earth. The pandemic has made everyone feel a little incapacitated or redundant, and for those in the arts, myself included, that word redundant has played heavily on my mind. But coming up with inventive ways to take back the control I have over my time and my life has been one of the most playful and joyful things to do in what would otherwise be a very scary situation. Our intelligence, our capacity to love, and our creative consciousness are such a rare and unique primal gift, and sometimes adversity reminds us just why we have them. Try this exercise. Get an old jam jar or tin and some paper you can either rip or cut into pieces. Write down the things that make you unique. Write down the skills that you have, from being able to use a computer program to being able to make a good cup of tea. Write down things that other people have said you're good at. You can message them if necessary to find out this information. Write down what you're grateful for. Write down some of your dreams, and write down some activities you love to do. Draw with colourful pens, doodle or sketch. Make this heap of paper its own beautiful story just by looking at it. Every day for 12 months, add something to the box or jar or tin that happened that day that was good. And again, this could be as simple as, I called an old friend and reconnected, to, I went for my first run in a decade. Every day you add to the abundance of paper, shuffle your hand around in there and pull something out. Allow yourself to really feel what you're reading. Or, if you prefer, you could wait until the end of the 12-month period and say, on your next birthday or festive holiday, tip out all the paper and allow yourself to be reminded of all the things that make you you, all the things that have created your year's story, and feel all the things that mattered once more. This is also a wonderful exercise to do with your family or friends, and a great way to remember what really matters to you most. At the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own story and the stories we put out there in the public space. We can choose to support important stories and start a movement behind them, such as Black Lives Matter, Hearts Not Parts, or the Me Too movement. And we can also choose to support sentimental stories, such as that of Captain Sir Tom Moore. We also have the power to share our own unique stories with others if we're ready to, so that we can help each other. Who you are and how you deal with your own humanity just might help someone else to deal with theirs. As Morgan Harper Nichols once said, "Tell the story of the mountain you climbed. Your words may become a page in someone else's survival guide." Talking of survival guides, take a look at Kim Rowell's newest book available on Unbound, titled "You Are So Much More Than Your Job." Who knows? It may just be your survival guide. Next week on the show, we speak to BBC Introducing singer-songwriter Susie Mack about her work with Grammy-nominated and Ivor Novello award-winning Ian Dench, playing some of the UK's most prestigious venues, raising money for the homeless, and her daily challenges with a killer allergy that nearly took her life. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the show. If you have a spare moment now, please like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in a review on Apple Podcasts, which will really help other people like yourself to find the show. Of course, you can also share the show with your friends by following us at the Brave Moment Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, or on Twitter at Moment Brave, or just follow the Linktree on all of our social media platforms. It's been so wonderful to have you all here with me again. Please get in touch with your own stories, and remember, your brave moment starts now.